Bing bong. Next stop, 52nd Street. I go to my usual perch, the farthest door from any part of the train. And just to set up this story, I'm from New York, so I'm on a New York City train. And I find my usual perch. I'm 14 years old, and I wear hijab. And I go to the farthest corner because I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be noticed. I always end up being the elephant on the train. And my brother finds his usual perch, he has his music in, and he blends in with everyone else. But of course, I'm the elephant on the train. And it's during the Persian Gulf War, and usually I escape the conversation. But today is not one of those days. And so begins the story of my why. So it starts with a lady, and she says to me, "You're the reason." And I go, "Hi, how are you?" And she goes, "You're the reason why my son is not home." And my parents have taught me to not respond and to not react to certain situations. And I knew this was going to be one of those situations. So I put my head down and I didn't say anything. And she continued on and continued on about how I was the reason why her son was over in the Persian Gulf War, and I was personally responsible at 14 years old in the 10th grade for the entire Persian Gulf War. And I held my head down. Meanwhile, I live in Alphabet City, and from 52nd Street, it's a 45 to 50-minute ride on a good day. This was not one of those days. Stop by stop, she continued to rant, and more people joined in. And I continued at my perch by the door, waiting for it to open at my stop. And if you know New York City trains, for most of the stops, the doors open on one side for a lot of the stops. My stop was on the opposite side where my perch was. Finally, the doors open, and I escape the taunts and the rants. This went on for my entire high school year. I had my hijab pulled off, and I had people tell me, "Why am I here?" I had people tell me, "Why don't I just go back home?" And I would always retort with, "I'm proud of my hijab." I even had a story where I was a pen pal of a child in Africa, in South Africa. I got the pleasure of being a child pen pal to a kid in South Africa. His name was Michael. And we shared stories, and we shared how my story and his story were similar, even though we were on different sides of the world. And I was featured in the newspaper, and I was also featured on this really big billboard in my school. And to some people, that would seem like a really big accomplishment. But for me, it was another thing that made me an elephant in my school. I was the only covered Muslim in my school. And I always resented the girls that didn't wear hijab because I felt it was a cop-out. At 16 years old, I graduated from high school, and I went to Baruch College in New York. Again, the elephant in the room. I was the only covering Muslim in my college class. And I went a good 2 weeks. I gave it a really big, hard try. And off came the hijab. And so started my veiling. And I know that that's ironic because this is considered a veil. But for me, taking this off was my mask. And I was now free from the taunts and the rants. But now began the pushing down of who I actually was. And that lasted for, what do you think? Somebody raise their hand. How long do you think I lasted that way? You know the story. Tell me, how long?
No, I'm gonna guess a year.
How long do
I
you
thought
think?
longer, 10 years.
Times 2. 20 years. I spent pushing down, pushing down. I would find myself in rooms where people were talking about what was in the news. And it was about Muslims, and it was about how women covered, etc. And do you think I spoke up for Islam, or do you think I spoke up for the women that bravely wore their hijab? No. I didn't speak negatively, but I didn't speak up. And that did more harm than good. And 3 years ago, I came face to face with myself on a beach in Ixtapa, Mexico. And call it what you want. You can call it God talking to me, a small little voice. Maybe I'm crazy. I have no idea. But this little voice said, Halimah, it's time. And when I heard that voice, I knew exactly what they were talking about. And again, I still tried to suppress it. This was May of 2015. Still tried to suppress it. June came and went. And July almost came and went. July 29th, I was sitting in a room with 100 managers making a 6-figure salary at a job that I loved, that allowed me to do the things that I wanted to do. And I was sitting in the room at my desk, and I picked up my bag and my notebook that I was writing in, and I walked out, and I never went back. And I spent 3 months in seclusion just praying and meditating on what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And it was on December 15th of 2015 that I decided that not only was I not going to allow myself to be suppressed anymore, I wasn't going to allow someone else. So began the beginning of my company, BU in HD. So HD meaning high def, bold, unapologetic, purposeful. And that's my why.
Nice.